Welcome, everyone. My name is Reza Farshkaran. I'm the platform tech lead for Nespresso. Today, I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about Ansible Automation Platform. We started using Ansible about 3 years ago in our company, and we have gone through a long way getting used to this product and all the use cases that we could have with it. So today, I would like to talk to you guys about our experience, the lesson learned that we had, some of the best practices that you can scale up Ansible Automation Platform. One of the things that with Ansible is going to happen when you are trying to start using it in your environment, you guys want to install AAP and move on to quickly creating content to utilize Ansible. And automation platform usually is neglected with regards to how you can performance tune it, how you can make it high available. The focus of this session is going to be how you can create a high available Ansible automation platform, because initially you're going to think that Ansible, the automation platform, is not mission critical. You guys are going to start creating use cases, schedule jobs, then when you are trying to upgrade, for example, next release when EDA is available and you guys trying to install it, you're going to have downtime. We're going to talk about some of the best practices, configuration as code, and ways that you can keep that uptime and run your Ansible jobs at scale. So I'm not going to talk too much about what is Ansible Automation Platform. I think by now you have been in so many sessions that you guys already know. With a show of hands, how many of you guys are already using Ansible Automation Platform? Okay, how many of you guys are considering it? Okay, so for those of you who are already using it, you know some of these functionalities and features. You know that compared to a command line Ansible, this is going to give you rollback access control. So what does that mean? You guys are going to have different job templates, different inventories, production, non-production, different credentials, and this is where you can use Ansible Automation Platform to assign those RBAC policies. One thing, if you have already used Ansible Automation Platform, you know that the organizational hierarchy that you have usually doesn't translate to the RBAC in Ansible. By that, usually what happens, you're going to start using the org teams, and quickly you're going to figure out that that's usually not how you can, it doesn't expand. And what you guys are going to end up doing for the specific teams that you have, you're going to create individual organization. We're going to talk more about that later, but just wanted to mention it. The other functionality is job scheduling. If you are coming from another solutions like Puppet, Chef, that you were used to these jobs running every 4 hours, 2 hours, how many, you can bring back the same functionality to achieve the desired state of your servers. The other functionality that is the focus is the RESTful API. This is where you can use Ansible Automation Platform to integrate it with your CI/CD pipeline and create event-driven automation. The other functionality, built-in notification. Basically, when you start scheduling all of these jobs, having all of these automation running, usually if everything is good, you don't care. But when the job fails, you want to get a notification from Slack, Microsoft Teams, or any webhook. The other functionality is the workflows. You guys are pretty familiar with it, probably, that you can connect multiple playbooks to create different logics to run different scenarios. For example, one of the use cases that we have, well, our team uses workflow to provision VMs and Azure instances. They just like answer a few surveys, and boom, their instance is created. The other functionality is clustering. When you want to run the same job against thousands of nodes, this is where you can use multiple execution nodes to scale up those SSH sessions. And if you have any security compliance requirement to capture the logs, send it to a Splunk or any other log aggregator, again, Ansible Automation Platform provides that. And the other one, the other feature is content collections. This is where it helps you basically avoid reinventing the wheel. There are so many contents that you can use to speed up your automations. So those of you guys who are using Ansible Automation Platform, how many of you guys follow their reference architecture? How many of you guys have a high available Ansible Automation Platform? How many of you guys have tried doing an in-place upgrade? How many of you guys had a successful upgrade at first try? Which version was it? Yeah. So one of the things that happens where most of the people, as I said, they only install one cluster. The challenge with the cluster is that once you are depending on that and it's mission critical, you cannot afford downtime. And you want to make sure that you have a high availability setup to account for it. Now, many people, when they are building AAP, they look into the database and they're like concerned about database replication, that like, oh, I need to replicate this, I don't have a DBA, I don't want to focus on this part. Or there are Ansible collections that they provide a high availability Postgres that you want to basically account for, you want to probably do that. Over the past 3 years, we have been using this reference architecture and configuration as code, and we have never had any need for any backup restore or any Postgres database dump. The whole idea behind it is that you make all of the configuration as code. There are contents that it's using the API basically. So you are using the API to create all the objects that you would use through GUI to put on the automation platform. Now the whole thing, it depends on configuration as code, and we are not going to talk about accessing it through the GUI. So the benefit of configuration as code is that the two clusters that you have are always the same configuration. All of the objects, all of the playbooks, job templates that you have on one cluster, it's always available on the other cluster. You can make the changes faster. Once you're making the change, it's being pushed to both of them. The other one is that if you are using Ansible at a scale, when you log into AAP, other than that activity stream that shows what person logged in and what change they made, usually there is no way for you to audit what happened, who changed the job template, who changed the tag, who changed the inventory on this job template. And you're going to realize it when you just launch the job and you're like, oops, I don't remember this host being in this, or this filter is not working. So I highly recommend you guys start using configuration as code. There is a collection in here that tomorrow there's going to be a session that you can use this collection to create, you can export the existing configuration that you have from existing AAP installation, and you can turn it to configuration as code and organize it. And if you look at that picture, basically you're going to have a file structure like that, that all of your configuration, all of your objects are in nice YAML format, and you guys can edit it and push it back to AAP as configuration as code. Now, besides doing this, you can also use Ansible itself to provision all of the VMs. Like, this is something that many people, they talk about containers and, oh, you can just like destroy and create it from scratch. A few times that we had done the upgrades, especially from major versions, from going from Tower to AAP, or from version 2.0 early access that we were having in our environment to the other ones, we had some challenges that we had to re-provision the VMs. Right now, we are using collections that these are available. I'll provide the link to you guys after the session to use these to talk to VMware in Playbook and create all of the VMs that you guys need to install AAP on it. Now, when you are doing configuration as code, one thing that I want you to pay attention, configuration as code is only achieved when you fully use it through that interface, through using the configuration objects in YAML format. If you decide to give some people edit access or admin access, and they go and make changes, which they are going to, it's going to get, you're going to have a config drift, and you're going to have challenges. We had this. We ended up removing everyone's edit access. You can have the system auditor access. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. If you use that role, that's a built-in role that basically allows everyone to view all the objects that are in AAP, but they cannot change anything. They cannot execute anything. They cannot change anything. So everything is based on the API access and configuration as code. Now, Ansible installer. How many of you guys, again, you said that there was 1 or 2 people that had a successful install at the first run. So here I have brought several of the common issues that we had over the time, so it will save time for you guys. One of them is that you can install Ansible controller and automation hub completely separate. You do not need to have them in one place. If you have a use case that you want to only upgrade Automation Hub, you can do it. If you want to only upgrade or install Ansible controller, you can do it. The way you do it in that inventory file, inventory.yaml file, you comment out all the variables for the Automation Hub, and you only install installer. And the same applies for the backup and restore. When you are doing a backup, be careful, because Ansible installer doesn't account for the free space. So what happens if you have a lot of content on your automation hub, it's going to try to copy them from one directory to another, and then it's going to try to compress it, and it's going to try to send it back to the admin node. And if you see that your box is freezing and you get an alert that the disk is full, it's because of this. Ansible installer, as of right now, doesn't account for the disk space. So you need to make sure that when you're doing an install or backup, you make sure that you check that part. The other thing about the installer, the rsync package, make sure that rsync is installed in your boxes. The difference between an installation with rsync installed and not installed, it's about 45 minutes. So we have done it so many times, and Ansible doesn't complain about it. The installer, if the rsync is not installed on any of your boxes, it's going to switch back to SCP, and you're going to see that in the installer, it's saying that using the legacy copy for execution environments and all that. So make sure that you do that. The other part is that if you're using the private SSH key for authentication during the installation, make sure that you use the full path. Because right now, the installer, when it runs, initially it's going to use the path that you have provided, and it's going to go without any issue. But when it reaches to those tasks that they are using rsync, if you haven't provided the full path, in middle of the installation, it's going to break, and you're going to end up with the AAP that is not coming up. So make sure that you do that. Another part is that to make sure you disable all the third-party repositories. If you are using Red Hat Satellite or any custom repositories, make sure you disable all of them. You're going to get errors that like YAML lint is not installed, required but not installed. You're going to do a yum list, and you're going to see that the package is there. If you pay attention, any package that usually is coming from EPEL repository usually conflicts and has issue. The installer doesn't like it. So make sure that you disable all of those repositories before installing Ansible. The other part is, if you are you guys using Automation Hub in your environment? How many of you guys are using Automation Hub? Okay. So those of you guys who are not using it, make sure that you start utilizing it. It comes with your subscription. It's free. It provides a lot of content from system roles that Red Hat is providing to like all the other collections from vendors. That saves you a lot of time with the content. Now, when you have a high availability, sorry, did we lose it? Time to go home? Overheating? There's a lot of wires in here, I don't know. This is why high availability is important, you see? Okay. Well, show must go on, so we move on. So if you have installed Automation Hub, make sure that initially when Automation Hub was introduced, it didn't support single sign-on. And you needed to install, you had to build in accounts. Then the Red Hat single sign-on tool was introduced that you could use central authentication. Now you don't need that. So if you have an inventory file from the previous installation and you copy it over to the new installer, be aware that there are new flags in the latest version that they let you have LDAP authentication. So keep that one in mind. The other part is the automation mesh is bidirectional. And in the configuration file with the peers keyword, you can change the direction. So if you have by accident requested a firewall rule that has gone through the whole process and you have got it approved and now you don't have the connectivity and you have realized that the source and destination, the direction of the traffic was wrong, you can just in the installer change the direction and the automation mesh is gonna work. The other part is the last one. Once you have an installation and you back it up, the backups are only valid for that minor version of Ansible. Keep that in mind, Ansible Automation Platform. If you have version 2.2 and you back it up and then you run the installer for 2.3, the backup that you had, there is no guarantee that you can successfully restore it to the new cluster. Make sure that you use configuration as code. We have had that issue. Okay, now I have to wait. I guess we're gonna go on. We're gonna go without the slides. Or up to here, do you guys have any question? The other slide is about the load balancer. How many of you guys have load balancer in front of your AAP? Okay. If you are gonna use AAP for API-driven automation, you need to have load balancer in front of it for multiple reasons. First, you don't want to send all of your API calls to one controller node. You need to make sure that you have a form of load balancing within them. The second part is that Ansible Automation Platform does not have any built-in rate limiting. So if you make a pipeline to launch a job and you have a bug in the logic and it is continuously sending requests, you can basically suffocate the whole AAP's API by sending the same request over and over, and Ansible AAP is going to launch it. So make sure you put the rate limit in front of it. Savior of the day. Hey, have you tried unplugging it and plugging it back? A classic one, sorry. Just create a ticket, I'll just fill the survey. So the other part is that if you have any kind of integration with other tools like Jenkins or ServiceNow, and these are launching API jobs and waiting for the status, they have a tendency that they're gonna try to request for the status. And the same issue that you need to basically limit the sessions that are coming from these sources. And the other part is that you guys gonna be able to, by using load balancer and following the, basically this model, this reference architecture, you guys gonna be able to, with simple script, you can fail over from one cluster to another cluster without any downtime. Now, so since I'm talking about the load balancer, I know that most of you guys have been really like in the sessions about the EDA and use cases. So I'm gonna talk about a little bit about EDA and some of the use cases that you can have with the load balancer. We have our use case specifically for Ansible, but you can apply it to any application. If you are using HA proxy in your environment or any other load balancer, we are using HA proxy, which has built-in Prometheus exporter, and it's exporting all of the metrics in open metric format. We are able to track the volume of 500 or 400 errors that are happening with each backend, with each server. Simply putting an alert, we were able to identify the servers, and using HA proxy's runtime API, you can remove the node that is having 500 error from your cluster. Now, we applied this to AAP. In your scenario, it can be anything. If you have a Tomcat application, any eCom application that you are depending on it, and it's a Tomcat, and usually the issue is the same as this cable, that you just need to restart it. It has a memory leak that you just need to restart it. What you can do, you can use the same setup there. You remove the node from the cluster, from the backend cluster, you restart the application and put it back. And this is all runtime API, so you are not going to have any downtime. So before I go with another example, how many of you guys are using Prometheus in your environment? How many of you guys are interested into using EDA in your environment? Okay. So for those of you guys who are interested in using EDA in your environment, depending on, you may have other monitoring solution in your environment, I would highly recommend looking into Prometheus. It's free, open source, and it's basically the de facto standard for Kubernetes environment. And most of the application infrastructure component, they come with a built-in exporter. And there's a whole lot of exporters that you can use to get the metrics. There is a project on GitHub called Awesome Prometheus Alerts. It provides you a large selection of alerts for Prometheus, for Alert Manager. So you can use these alerts as a source of events. Now, maybe for you guys, I don't know if you guys are using Elk Stack in your environment. There are alerts for it. You can go and look at these alerts, and it should be a good starting point for you guys to consider what use cases you can have. In our environment, we were heavily focused on HA proxy. That's what we implemented. We also had another use case. We have a security agent that during Black Friday sales, it decided that it's going to run the scheduled scan on our network. And half of our data center's network traffic was this cloud security solution scanning the boxes at the peak of our sale. So we did a POC with the EDA, and we were able to get the metrics from our firewalls. If you have a checkpoint firewall, I don't know what you guys are using, but there's a high chance that it has a Prometheus exporter or any other way of extracting that information. We were able to get those metrics from our firewall and our eCom application, correlate them in EDA, and decide when we have a high number of users on our application and there is a bandwidth limit, there is a threshold that we are meeting, we would send an API call to this cloud security agent to postpone the scan until an hour later it would come and check the conditions again to see if the condition is met or not. So there are a lot of these examples. There are hundreds of these alerts that I'm pretty sure that some of these applications you guys are using in your environment. So give it a chance. You may find something that helps you with finding the use cases in your environment. One thing about Automation Hub I have in here, it was a note, with the load balancers, since we are in the load balancer topic, make sure that you enable the sticky sessions. This is not, again, in the documentation, and the installer is going to fail, and you guys going to try to find out why it's happening. I think you have already experienced that.
It's just sticky sessions.
Yeah. Now, automation controller. So if you guys have started using automation controller, there are few things that are different from Ansible in a command line format versus Ansible in the context of automation platform. When you are running any job on Ansible Automation Platform, depending how you have set it up, the data, the variables, everything is coming from Git repository. Usually before running any job, you have to run a project update to make sure that you have the latest variables. Now, if you are familiar with the hierarchy of Ansible, there is like 22 different places that you put the variables. And usually there is no best practice. No one tells you like when you are supposed to put which variables where. In the context of AAP, there is one simple thing. Try to use the playbook variables. Why? Because every time you do a project update, your playbook variables are updated automatically. Inventory variables, on the other hand, they require another dependency job, which is the inventory sync. In large scale, when you are running this, the difference is like 50% more dependency jobs that you are running on your AAP. So keep that in mind. Also, the group vars. If you guys are using group vars all in your inventory, usually in command line, you change it, and it applies to all the hosts. Ansible Automation Platform, once it imports the inventory group vars all, it does not change them. If you update the variables in your Git repository, or even if you remove them from your Git repository, Ansible Automation Platform is not going to remove it. It is by design because you can have multiple Git repo in one inventory. And this is most people, they come to this, and we were under the same impression that if I'm mapping my Git repo and I'm importing my inventory, all the changes that I'm making for the old vars should be reflected in AAP. It wasn't the case. We have gone through the bug reports and everything, and at the end, it wasn't a bug. It's a feature, okay? So keep that in mind. The other one, DNS. If you don't have DNS caching enabled in your environment, if you have DNS mask, perfect. If you don't, please consider it. We had some issues that we couldn't point the finger at what's happening, and at the end, it was the DNS. This has been in so many, for the past 4 years, in every Ansible Fest, everyone has had a presentation about DNS, and it's always forgotten by people. Set up DNS caching, otherwise you guys have some performance issues. The other part is that utilize custom execution environments. Any of you guys are using custom execution environments? Okay, so custom execution environments, every time you run a project update, your Ansible AAP is going to try to download all the roles and collections from that project, from Automation Hub or from Public Galaxy. And it's time consuming. It takes some time, especially if in your environment you have, I don't know, 50, 60 roles that you're loading into one project, depending on size of it. Using an execution environment, you can basically load it once, and your job runs are going to be way faster without any dependency on it. Use job slicing, forks, and strategies. So this is another thing that, like, by default, when you run a playbook on Ansible, it's going to choose execution node or a controller node based on your setup, and it's going to start launching all the jobs from that. You can use job slicing. That basically what it does, it divides your inventory in multiple segments and runs each one of them on a separate controller node. This speeds up the process. Forks, again, it decides how many concurrent sessions you want to establish. And strategy is, again, if you have the free strategy, it says that, OK, run the first task on any of the hosts. Whenever it comes back, go with the second one. While if you have like a different strategy, it's going to basically, by default, I think it tries to wait for all of them to finish the first task, then it goes to the second task, then the third task. So keep that in mind. The other setting that you guys may want to consider is the callback receivers. This is something that at larger scale, if you have thousands of jobs running at once, you need to manually overwrite it. By default, there are 4 callback receivers on every controller. On AAP 2.3, this is dynamic, but if you are if you have hybrid nodes, which execution nodes and controller nodes are sharing the same host, you need to manually customize that number to make sure that it's performing the way you want. One of the other things is the UI. How many of you guys heavily use the UI? Okay. If you are using UI, what happens when you run a job and you realize that you have made a mistake with one of the variables? You usually end up rerunning the job, and you have to enter all the variables that you have put in place. Anything that was prompt on launch, you get punished basically to put those back to run the job. Now, when you have a solution like Jenkins in front of it, it gives you that history that you can choose the last build and edit before launch. So right now, we are overcoming that limitation with Jenkins, but I had a conversation with the devs. Within the next release of AAP, they have promised that they're gonna bring that functionality, that if you have a failed job, if you want to relaunch it, they're gonna add that edit and relaunch option. The automation mesh. Most people, they talk about remote hosts that you want to manage, like edge nodes you want to manage within the same LAN, within the same VLAN, within the same network, within the same data center. You can use the same setup to meet some security requirement. If you are in a PCI environment, if you have a requirement for a bastion server, you can use the hop nodes to meet that requirement. And the security patching and OS patching for the AAP. Whenever you are doing any kind of security patching, make sure that, again, you disable the other repositories other than the base OS, because it overrides the Python packages that comes with AAP, and you're gonna face some issues. Okay, I'm gonna need to be really fast. So, Automation Hub, again, I know that like most of you guys are not using, but if you start using it, one thing that I want you to pay attention, first of all, you don't need to put the Automation Hub in DMZ. I know that Red Hat documentation, as you see, it mentions that the Automation Hub needs to be in DMZ. Automation Hub needs to be in DMZ and accept incoming connection if you are using execution nodes, because execution nodes, they're gonna need to come back to get the execution environment and contents from the Automation Hub. If you don't have that requirement, if you are within a same data center, everything is in the same data center, you can use a secure LAN, and you can implement Automation Hub in your secure LAN. The other thing about the Automation Hub, when you are using Automation Hub, you are dealing with multiple components. It doesn't have a unified API because behind the scene, it is basically 3 components. You have Pulp, which you are using for all the collections. You have Galaxy API, and you also have the container registry. So pay attention to those. Contents, Ansible contents. When you guys start using Ansible, again, you don't need to recreate all the infra roles. Red Hat provides system roles for most of the common tasks, most of the main configuration that you're gonna have in your environment. You can use Red Hat system roles. This is like SSH, rsyslog, or firewalld, all of these components. You can use Red Hat certified content to basically achieve the same thing. And if you have a Red Hat satellite, again, there's a collection for provisioning it and also having satellite as configuration as code. So keep that in mind. You can also use the content that comes for compliance as code. If you have a HIPAA environment, PCI environment, and you want to create an image or you want to run a scheduled job to make sure that you are compliant for any audit purposes or anything, that's the URL. And you can, again, you guys are going to be able to get the same content on private automation hub. The execution environments, we talked about it. So if you are trying to create the custom execution environment, when you create an image, it maps all of the host repository to your execution environment, and it enables all of them by default. You need to make sure to disable that. Right now, there is no way to modify the Red Hat repo inside the image. So on the host VM, you guys are going to need to use the subscription manager to disable all the other repositories before creating an image. Now, these are some of the general tips that I'm going to share with you guys. These are based on some of the incidents that we had in our environment. Whenever you are using Ansible, you guys are going to create a lot of job templates. A very simple trick is using this magic variable, which is called Ansible manage, that you can define a custom config in your ansible.config file to hey, this file is managed by Ansible. Don't touch it. It's going to be overwritten. But the other thing that you can do, it's the second two lines. You can use those magic words to put the full path for the role and the template path that your config file is coming. That helps you guys with going back when you want to see, okay, which role, which template file is putting this config. You can use those to basically navigate. Also if you are using a template, there is a validate parameter. So see which application supports the validation of config file and utilize that. The benefit of this is that it avoids any kind of invalid config file. If you don't use the validate option, Ansible is going to put the config file in place. When you restart the application, it may not come up. When you are validating before replacing the content, it's going to try to validate it. And if it's a valid syntax, then it's going to apply it on the box. The backup option in the template, there is a backup parameter that what it does, it backs up, it does a snapshot with the time, and it keeps the existing config file in the same directory. You need to make sure the application that you're using, that template, correctly handles those files. There are applications that they ignore the extension that is being used. Any config file that is in there, it's gonna use it as a source of config. And it doesn't matter if it has a timestamp at the end. So keep that in mind. The other one is do not use the copy module. If you have any playbook that is using copy module, do not use it. It is slow, and again, it's like twice slower than the synchronize, post-synchronize. So keep that in mind. Handlers. Whenever you run Ansible, if you know, handlers are executed at the end of the play. So your roles are executed, and at the end, handlers are executed. Now, one of the things that can happen is you run Ansible, you run your playbook, config files are changed, but before reaching the end of your application, before end of the job run, the network, there's a network issue. The job fails. The second run and then what's going to happen, the handler is not going to run. The application is not going to restart. If you rerun your application, what's going to happen, it is not going to change the files. So the handlers are not going to get triggered. So keep that in mind. Try to avoid using handlers. If you want to, we had this issue in production. The first job run failed. We ran the second one, everything is green, and we are like, okay, the configuration was applied. The issue was that, no, the handler wasn't triggered, and we never really applied the configuration. The timer, profile task, and the profile roles callback. I don't know if you guys use any of these features. These are flags that you can enable in ansible.config file. What it does, it benchmarks every task, every role that you are running. So it tells you which task is like taking the longest to execute. That's a good way to optimize the performance of your Ansible content. The enabling pipelining, again, it's another option that is in the config file. Keep that in mind. And the new VS extension. Try to use Ansible lint and VS Code extension. Now that there is the new feature for the AI, the Ansible, what was it? The light speed. It's going to help you guys a lot. You basically don't need to go back and forth between the documentation and your code. The other thing most people, you guys gonna experience is undefined variable. You run your job, and in middle of the job, it fails, and this variable is not defined. What we have come up in our environment as a standard, we use this as the first task in the role, and we define the required variable for each role that we have. There are variables in your role that you don't assign value to it. It's like, for example, credentials. That's going to be different from one environment to another, and it doesn't make sense to put it in the defaults. What we do, we use this task, and we list those variables under another variable called whatever required variables in here is like the HA proxy that we are using. And this task, at the beginning of the job run, it validates and makes sure that all of those variables are defined with a valid value before moving on to run the job and apply anything. So that may help you guys. The Jinja filters and Python methods. Almost all of Ansible modules, they support Jinja filters and also Python modules. People usually only use the Jinja filters, but you can, if you are familiar with Python, and there's a Python method that you know, you can use it inside the tasks. With vault handling, make sure that you always use the vault ID. That's going to help you to identify which vault key you used in which environment to encrypt the variable, instead of just like trying to brute force to find which key you used. And use tags, do not overuse them. Tags are really useful when you have a large playbook and you just want to run part of it. This is something that my team, we didn't use them, then we ended up overusing them, and then we went back to like finding a sane amount. Usually tags are meant to be used in playbooks. Do not try to apply the tags to every task in your role. And again, in the documentation, it says that tags are for the playbooks. And the last part is that there are ways in Ansible to overcome some of the limitations. One of them is like the fun fact that I have there is that you can have a role with only variables. You don't need to have tasks there. That gives you guys flexibility when you want to share variables between the roles and between playbooks, because Ansible doesn't keep a catalog. Everything that you are defining is in the context of that repo, the group vars or inventory vars that are in that environment. If you want to share variables from one basically playbook to another one, you can use the variables inside the roles without any task in the role. Okay, that's mainly it. Thank you guys. Do you guys have any questions? Well, thank you so much. Thank you for your time. Basically, if it's a group var all, it does not do it. And it is by design. Once it imports it, it doesn't change it. There's an RFE for it, and the reason for it is that the inventories that you have in AAP, you can have multiple SME sources. The way it resolves it, it goes with the, again, alphabetic order, and like the last one is applied, and then it doesn't change it. If you go back to your Git repository and remove that variable, no matter how many times, he knows what I'm talking about. Yeah, so You have to either manually from the GUI, you can overwrite it. Yeah, or like completely purge it and resync it. So it's like if you are using only one Git repo, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So just keep that in mind. Yeah. No, no, because the thing about GUI is that, yeah, yeah, the reason is that we want to encourage everyone, even in lower environments, to get used to configuration as code. The moment you, yeah, yeah. Yeah, we have it. So basically, depending on like some people, they don't, they use the same AAP installation, and they just separate the objects based on the labels and other stuff, like inventories, they separate the inventories. We have like a separate instance. But again, we apply the same thing in the dev environment because historically, whenever you let something be different on the dev environment, it's going to backfire in the production because it's completely different.
Yeah, and I just like having the dev environment.
Yeah.
For me, I like initially being able to play with.
Yeah. Well, you're going to be the admin, so you're going to have the admin access.
Well, actually, I'm not an admin.
Yeah.
So all your projects and templates, credentials, all of that's in code?
Yeah, all of it. So we are using LDAP authentication, and again, all the configuration for the LDAP, you can basically put it in configuration as code.
Are your credentials just vaulted and stuff?
Yeah, all of them, they are vaulted. But again, like there are other features that are coming to AAP, and one of them is an interface in the GUI to let you guys use the credentials from the drop-down menu and make some encryption. So there are RFEs for it, and there's going to be features for credentials handling through that part. Yep.
So how did you do, to me it feels like the hard part is like knowing what I can do with the API. Like, so I guess, did you go into the UI and kind of play around with it?
No, so there is the Ansible, I think there's going to be a session. I'm available. If you go out there, I'll show you. Like if you are interested,